Spider-Man: Homecoming. Screenplay by Jonathan Goldstein and John Francis Daly. John Watts and Christopher Ford, and Chris McKenna and Eric Summers. Directed by John Watts. Produced by Kevin Feige and Amy Pascal. By Wesley Blomquist. Introduction to Spider-Man. The movie was released on July 7, 2017. Spider-Man: Homecoming was released as the 16th movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe franchise, following a deal between Sony and Marvel Studios. Spider-Man was originally created in 1962, debuting in Amazing Fantasy number 15 by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Spider-Man has been one of the most popular superheroes of all time, with 7 total movies made about the character, countless television shows, as well as appearances in other movies. Stan Lee was falling on hard times and was forced to sell the movie rights to this character to Sony Pictures. This meant that the Marvel Comics launched their highly successful Marvel Cinematic Universe. They could not use Spider-Man in any of their films. In 2015, Sony Pictures and Marvel Studios struck a deal in which Marvel could finally use Spider-Man in their universe, and thus Spider-Man: Homecoming was created. Peter Parker. Peter is a 15-year-old high school student who lives with his Aunt May in Queens, New York, where he attends Midtown School of Science and Technology. His best friend is named Ned Leeds, who is the same social status as Peter, but tries to break them out of their shell by making Peter attend a party and the homecoming dance with his crush, Liz. Peter is extremely smart and is on the decathlon team, but struggles to find his true identity. Aunt May, who is extremely supportive of Peter and acts not only as a parent to him, but as a supportive friend, even going as far as to drive Peter and Ned to the party Ned made them go to. At school, Peter is bullied by one of his decathlon teammates, Flash Thompson, as Flash calls Peter names such as Penis Parker and taunts him, which causes Peter to have low self-confidence. At his heart, Peter just wants to fit in and help others around him succeed, but he must get through high school first. Synopsis. Spider-Man: Homecoming is about a teenager who was bitten by a radioactive spider a month prior to the film taking place in 2016 and gains superhero abilities. He was recruited by Iron Man Tony Stark to help some of the Avengers in a fight against themselves. After the fight is when the movie takes place. Peter decides to become the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man to help his town, all while trying to balance his home life with his Aunt May, his social life with his best friend Ned, and his academic life as a student. Peter initially wants to take on more responsibilities, but runs into trouble when he bites off more than he can chew by trying to capture and fight the supervillain, the Vulture. Unknowingly, Peter learns that his crush is the daughter of the supervillain, and he must decide what actions to take in order to take down the villain while keeping his secret identity safe from his friends and family. He ultimately takes down the bad guy, but decides that being a superhero can wait and needs to take time to figure out who he is going to be as a person, as he is still a developing teenager with social issues and everyday problems as the rest of the world. Elements of analysis. Context, peer, and work. Peers. Peter is a high school student who is awkward and starts off with very little friends, one friend to be exact. He is part of the decathlon team where he does a majority of his socializing. Peter has his best friend Ned who pushes him into social activities and events. Peter also must deal with a school bully who torments him and in most of his classes and clubs. Work. Being a teenager with no job, Peter was thrust into the workforce because of his superhero abilities. He wants to work and be a part of something bigger than himself, but cannot find a stable balance between all of his responsibilities. He starts to lose track of school, going as far as to get detention, which for his Aunt May is unacceptable. Psychosocial identity. Identity. As Peter Parker starts his work as a superhero and tries to find himself as a student, he cannot determine who he is as a person. Peter is compelled to save the city while trying to maintain his personal and social life. He wants to be considered cool and popular in school, but cannot find the right way to do so without losing who he believes himself to be as a person. Peter has a hard time determining what he believes are the right things to do and what he believes in, as he is constantly conflicted about who he is as a person. Context. Peers. The context of peers comes into play with Peter Parker as he is a high school student constantly surrounded by peers. His peers influence him more than anything else in his life, especially his best friend Ned Leeds. Ned is a smart student as well as Peter, but is a more social student than Peter. Ned influences Peter in a positive way, especially academically. Steinberg explains that all the characteristics of friends that influence adolescents' behavior, their friends' school performance has the greatest impact. Peter's being influenced is clearly demonstrated through Steinberg's quote during this line of dialogue. Ned: "Okay, come on, we'll be late to class." Peter: "I'm not going to class." Ned: "You're already in so much trouble for ditching the decathlon." Peter: "Dude, listen, I figured it out, right? The wingsuit guy is stealing from damage control, and what he takes from damage control, that's how he builds weapons, so all I gotta do is catch him." Ned: "But we have a Spanish quiz." Peter: "Ned, I'm probably never gonna be back here. Mr. Stark is moving these Avengers upstate. So when I bring this guy in, Ned, dude, do you want to be a high school dropout?" Peter: "I am so beyond high school right now." Peter also faces bullying within his social life, which is sadly not unusual within today's society. At school, Steinberg explains that there are two types of bullies, and Peter's bully lines up with Steinberg's explanation that some bullies are athletically and academically competent, friendly, and neither shy nor aggressive. Peter's bully is equivalent to bullies in the real world as they are constantly trying to undermine their targets. Peter Parker does feel consequences of his bully's actions at the beginning of the movie before he becomes more confident of himself. But because he is bullied, he is not considered popular. Steinberg explains that being unpopular has negative consequences for adolescents' mental health and physical development. Peer rejection and friendliness are associated with subsequent depression, behavior problems, and academic difficulties. Context work. Peter Parker is a working adolescent who, similarly to average adolescents, prioritizes his work over most of his other responsibilities. Work is defined by Peter as he progresses through the movie, deliberately putting his school, social life, and home life to the wayside in favor of his job as a superhero. Adolescents who are involved in a job have shown that working long hours in turn leads to disengagement from school and increased behavior problems. This is evident during a conversation Peter has with his Aunt May. Peter: "May, I'm okay. Honestly, just relax. I'm fine." May: "You. Cut the bullshit. I know you left detention. I know you left your hotel room in Washington. I know you sneak out of this house every night. That's not fine, Peter. You have to tell me what's going on. Just lay it out. It's just me and you." The conversation shows that because Peter's prioritizing his long work hours, he starts to display problematic behavior. His increased attention towards his job causes a lack of engagement in school as well, which is shown during his previous conversation in which he debated dropping out of school. Although Peter starts off letting his job affect him negatively, he does end up learning responsibility from his job and is forced to learn how to balance major tasks and responsibilities. In a study done to explain the relationship between work and positive outcomes amongst teenagers, Schmidt, A. Danharton, D.N. Belchak, F.D., determined that the simple main effects of responsibility on health-related outcomes are inconsistent, although they do conclude that the majority of effects on adolescents are positive. Identity. Identity is a common struggle for Peter throughout the film as he must figure out who he is and what he would like to represent. Steinberg illustrates that at this point in life, young people must take important choices about their education and their commitment to other people about their commitments to other people and thinking about these questions prompts them to ask more questions about themselves. What do I really want out of life? What things are important to me? What kind of person would I really like to be? These are questions exemplified by Peter as he struggles with himself. He must determine what he values more, his job, his home life, or his social life. He learns to balance all three out and discovers that he is someone who wants to remain grounded to his beliefs during a conversation with his mentor, Tony Stark. Peter decides what type of hero he will be, thus solidifying his identity. Peter: "Thank you, Mr. Stark, but I'm good." Tony: "You're good? Good? How are you good?" "Well, I mean, I'd rather stay home on the ground for a little while. Friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. Somebody's got to look out for the little guy, right?" Peter exemplifies the psychosocial development of identity as he demonstrates each quality of the five-factor model as explained by Steinberg. The model states that there are five critical personality dimensions: extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism, and openness to experience. Peter throughout the movie experiences all three of these changes made by himself as a way of showing that he is growing up and developing. The main issue for Spider-Man: Homecoming, there seem to be two main issues that take place that Peter must overcome and complete. The first being Peter must defeat the supervillain that is after him, the Vulture. The second task is determining what type of hero he should be. Throughout the movie, Peter uses his new and improved suit to fight the villains, but when the suit gets to his head, his mentor takes it away. He is then forced to fight the villain and save the day using his own ragtag suit. By doing so, he uses his knowledge and natural heroic ability to outsmart the Vulture and take him down without ending the Vulture's life. The second task that Peter completely completes by the end of the movie is determining which type of superhero he is going to be. Throughout the movie, Peter prioritizes being a hero over everything else and goes on hero duty for the majority of his days. While he does this, he takes on more than he can handle by trying to save everyone and anyone. By the end of the movie, after taking on the big villain, he understands that he can take on anyone he wants, but it is better to save the little guy who cannot save themselves. He determines the type of hero he will be by understanding the importance of his heroic identity to the citizens of the city instead of trying to always save the world. This is demonstrated when Tony Stark explains that Peter is making a better choice because he will stay close to the ground, build up your game, helping the little guy, like that lady who bought you a churro. I do believe that Peter Parker is an average teenager, aside from the superpowers. Peter tries his hardest just to get through high school, similarly to today's high school students. Peter is socially awkward yet very smart, so he understands that he is awkward and is willing to make changes to become social and popular. In a study done by Zotova et al., explained how students are influenced by their peers to participate in risky behavior, but a majority of the time, the pressure comes from their closest friend, which Ned is to Peter. His friend Ned forces Peter to go to a party while Peter does not want to go, but he does go to the party anyway, as a normal teenager would. A study done to explain why risky behavior is common with peer pressure explained that data suggests that peer conformity during risky decision-making in adolescence is a socially motivated, deliberative process. Peter participated in risky behavior as a result of peer pressure as any teenager would. His motivation for participating in the peer pressure was a way for him to become more socially accepted, which is what a teenager in today's society would do. In addition to peer pressure, Peter also experiences an identity crisis, which is experienced during adolescence by many teenagers. Steinberg explains an identity crisis using Erikson's theoretical framework to explain that identity diffusion is characterized by an incoherent, disjointed, incomplete sense of self. Steinberg points out that the phenomenon that Peter is feeling is felt by many individuals during the same point in their lives. Peter is constantly trying to figure out who he is as a person as well as what ideals he would like to follow. Because Peter experiences the same dilemmas and problems that teenagers experience, I believe Peter Parker is an average teenager. We're excited.